Meg Griffin is one of the most underutilized and underappreciated characters in Family Guy, if not all of adult animation. She started out as a regular teenager looking for a place in the world, but as the series progressed, Meg and the views on her changed dramatically. Years of bullying at school and abuse at home led to Meg finding ways to get what she wanted and pursuing some interesting and sometimes illegal outlets. However, she didn't start off looking to take out her frustration and desperation on others. The first time Meg was the focus of an episode was in episode 2, I Never Met the Dead Man. Meg had to beg for one of her parents to take her out driving so she could get her license. During this outing, Peter wound up wrecking the car into a satellite dish, resulting in the entire town being without TV. Peter, fearing the consequences, allowed Meg to take the blame with the promise he would buy her a new car. Meg was just as easily manipulated in the following episode, Chitty Chitty Death Bang, where in her need to gain friends, Meg unknowingly walked into a cult meeting full of impressionable kids waiting to take their own lives. In Season 2's Love Thy Trophy, Meg found a way to trick people in order to get money for a Prada bag. While the neighborhood was concerned with building a float together, Meg took Stewie into her new job, telling customers he was her son to gain sympathy. That alone wouldn't be so awful, but Meg then guilted people into giving her large tips by spreading around that she had to feed Stewie dog food and that he was a crack baby.
I love crack. I'm absolutely cuckoo for crack,
resulting in Stewie briefly being taken from the Griffin home. In episode 12 of this season, 15 Minutes of Shame, Meg displayed more of her cunning nature. After her family embarrassed her at her slumber party, Meg decided to trick them into attending Diane's talk show in an effort to get her family to see how much they embarrassed her. This wound up backfiring with the Griffins being asked to star in a reality show, but it was a glimpse into Meg's more demanding and aggressive side that would develop. Meg wouldn't be the spotlight again until Season 3. While this is the season that featured the first viewer male storyline, we're only including the episodes The Kiss Scene Round the World and Fish Out of Water. The first of these stories put Meg in an incredibly vulnerable situation in which, thinking she was about to die, she gave her first kiss to Neil Goldman. This led to Neil taking things way too far and harassing Meg to the point where she had to give a brutal teardown of him on the local news. While Meg clearly hated how Neil acted, she was the only one to step up and try to help when Neil was found standing on the edge of City Hall, looking as though he was going to jump. The latter of the two stories revolved around Meg, desperate for a fun spring break, feeling as though she was the odd one out among her peers. Her attitude in this story is further exaggerated the next time Meg is center stage in Don't Make Me Over. During the previous story, all Meg had done was complain and mope, with her only hint at being willing to do anything illegal being mentioned when Lois was meant to steal an ID for Meg to use. However, this entitled, pouty demeanor would be presented tenfold after Meg got a makeover in an attempt to boost her self-esteem. This wound up working a little too well, as not only did Meg get the attention she craved from people, but she was also thrust into the limelight, singing with her family in a small band. During these early seasons, Lois was still in the role of a protective and nurturing parent, and so protested seeing her daughter exploited for sales. Meg, on the other hand, had demanded Lois back off and allow her to make her own decisions. Unfortunately, this led to Meg being humiliated during a skit for SNL in which she slept with one of the cast members. This would be the last real episode where her parents came to her defense, as Lois comforted Meg and Peter burst on the set to beat up the man that slept with his daughter. This would be a far cry from how they behaved towards Meg going forward.
What's going on? I heard a noise. Is somebody downstairs?
Oh, God, Meg, you startled me. I'm sorry.
With the next story involving Peter selling Meg to Neil in order to pay off a debt to Mort. After being used for slave labor and only being allowed to leave when Neil was blackmailed and tore up the contract, it's no wonder why Meg was so off the rails in the next episode she would be a focus in, Barely Legal. In this episode, Meg was distraught at the idea of going to the school dance alone and came home threatening to take her own life until Brian offered to accompany her as her date. When compared to how Meg was treated in 8 Simple Rules for Buying My Teenage Daughter, it's really no wonder why she became so attached to Brian. Seeing him speak up for her and then the two sharing a kiss led to Meg believing there was more between them than there really was. This is also the first time we really see the more deluded part of Meg's mind. After refusing to let Brian end the odd tension growing between them, Meg decided to kidnap the canine, luring him with dog food before knocking him unconscious. This would be her first real criminal act in the series. The very next episode, Road to Rupert, showed Meg trying to go back to her old ways of being as helpful and kind as possible, offering to drive Peter around after he lost his license. This didn't work in her favor, as Peter and his friends quickly took advantage and pushed Meg to the edge, leading to her assaulting another driver in a fit of road rage. In Season 8's Dial Meg for Murder, Meg was revealed to be in a relationship with a prisoner. After Luke was caught by Joe, Meg was also arrested for harboring a fugitive. This experience had hardened Meg to the point that when she was released, she terrorized her family and peers, going as far as to crack open students' skulls with a pillowcase full of sodas and smashing Peter's teeth on the stairs. What made this even worse was that Meg had even admitted that her main motivation for embracing the criminal mindset was to no longer be a victim to everyone else's harassment.
I was just so tired of being everyone's whipping girl that it felt kind of good to do some of the whipping.
This is made all the more upsetting when we realized the next time Meg got a substantial amount of screen time wouldn't be until Season 10 in Seahorse Seashell Party. This has quickly become one of the most iconic moments in the series. Seeing Meg finally lash out at her family and express her anger at being neglected and abused was incredibly satisfying, but it all came crashing down by the time the credits rolled. Meg had made the difficult choice to continue being the target of her family's frustration in order to keep them from attacking one another. The next time Meg strayed was in Season 11's Friends Without Benefits. During this, Meg became obsessed with her classmates. After learning he was gay and into Chris, Meg had tried convincing Chris to sleep with Kent and tell her about it. When Chris refused, Meg had the opportunity to let the whole thing go. Instead, she decided to go to Quagmire for roofies to use on Chris. Luckily, she decided not to go through with it, but the fact that she was willing to try earned the D a mention. In A Fistful of Meg, there was a brief shot at the contents of her locker. We see a small child address Meg as her mom, before Meg demands to know what the child was doing out of their box.
What are you doing out of your box?
Meg then slammed her books into the child as she rushed to close the locker back up. The next time Meg was seen breaking the rules, it was much more tame, simply asking that Brian take the SATs for her. This trend of being far more calm goes on for a while, with Meg helping Peter stand up to his sister and helping Patty avoid being used by Brian. However, in Season 15 this trend was broken. The Peter principle gave Meg an opportunity to use her father's new position of power to punish her peers for being cruel to her and her friends. This level of brutality towards her classmates escalated in the D in Apartment 23. After Brian posted an insensitive and racist post on Twitter, Meg and Chris found themselves surrounded by a bunch of angry teens. Chris lashed out by smacking a tray into the side of a student's face, causing the Kingsman-inspired fight that followed, in which Meg and Chris viciously injured and murdered dozens of kids. Meg would take more lives in Season 17 when she gave up her spot competing in the Olympic Games in order to save Peter. In an impressive feat, Meg shot down several soldiers as she broke into the prison and freed Peter. Most recently, in Season 20's Hard-Boiled Meg, she caused not only countless injuries and a ton of collateral damage, but numerous deaths. What's worse is by the end of this episode, Meg realized that she wasn't doing this with Seymour as she had thought, learning that she had made him up in her time of loneliness. The chances of Meg becoming more erratic and violent is very likely considering the pattern. While Meg is often written off as an unwanted member of the Griffin family, it's easy to see where all of this rage and loneliness come from. What do you all think? What do you predict for Meg's future? Do you think she should be given any leniency for her crimes? Let us know in the comments. Until next time, take care.